Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another episode of Attribution Nation. In our current series, we're stepping into the C-suite to hear directly from CMOs navigating today's most complex marketing challenges. From AI disruption to the age-old alignment battles with sales, we're unpacking the real reporting and data problems that today's leaders are solving for, and some of the ones that are keeping them up at night still. So join us for candid conversations that go beyond metrics into the strategies, experiments, and lessons shaping the future of marketing leadership. I am joined today's episode by EJ Schmidt, and EJ is the CMO and Principal of Orange Marketing Consulting. And what we're going to talk about a little bit here is we're going to talk about this kind of phenomenon that EJ has discovered in PE-backed B2B SaaS, where we've uncovered, well, EJ's uncovered, that there is a 24 to 36 month stall that happens in PE-backed B2B SaaS. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the ways that he's measured this and identified this so that you all can learn from this. So EJ, tell us a little bit about what you found here with this stall that you've identified.
Yeah, sure. Just let me explain a little bit more about what I do and where I come from. So I'm a vertical SaaS marketing leader, and I've grown up through a variety of tech companies, hardware, services, software. Got into SaaS, really specialized on a vertical B2B SaaS. Let's say between $25 to $250 million ARR range, also bigger, but mostly PE or growth equity backed. And I've been a marketing leader there, go-to-market transformation leader, operating advisor. And I've worked mostly in multi-product post-acquisition portfolios where the deal thesis really assumes, pretty ambitious revenue synergies, with obviously a cost curve that grows slower than the revenue curve. And what I've invariably seen, and this is not a law, by the way, because I ran the thesis by a lot of friends that are either in the PE space themselves and on the operating side or fellow CMOs. So it's not a law, but it happens quite a lot. And what tends to happen is that, an existing SaaS company buys a bolt-on acquisition, and then year one looks fine. Second year, typically budgets get reduced. It's more tilted towards, near-term demand capture and so on and so forth. The product roadmap tends to focus a little bit more on integration versus additional features and functionality sets. And again, the halo starts to kind of wane from the original founder. And then in year three, we get this stall, which is not necessarily things falling off a cliff, but rather that the thesis is not really working out relative to the initial growth that was modeled and arguably should be capable of realizing versus the results. And then that are not meeting expectations. And then typically you get, a little bit of a blame game as to, hey, is this a marketing problem? Is this a sales problem? Is it a product problem? And so on and so forth. And so what I put some thought into was, hey, given the fact that this is just a high probability, is there a way to kind of diagnose this? What would be the things to look for? And then how can you solve it? And then obviously later on, start to think through how can you prevent it?
Okay. I love this because this is something that impacts obviously a lot of organizations, because a lot of organizations get bought by PE and B2B SaaS. But what I love about this most is that you've got ways to diagnose this, and that we can talk through and give people tools and ways to see if this is something that's impacting them. And if it is, then obviously there's ways to resolve it and address it. But I love that we can actually just be super direct in what we're going to measure to identify if we are getting into this stall. So EJ, maybe let's start with how did you identify this challenge of this stall that happens in months 24 to 36? Like, what were the things that you saw that were like, wait, I think something's happening here and it's happening frequently?
Yeah. So I experienced it, first of all, when I was with those multi-billion-dollar companies where we acquired companies. And then, first year, typically things were really good second year. It was getting more challenged. We were trying to get more efficient. And then year 3, there were some significant challenges, and it was just not living up to the original thesis. And then there was a lot of finger pointing and or belly button staring. So that was one area where I found it. And then later on in life, getting called in by friends in that own PE portfolio companies, like, hey, this is not the pain is on the pipeline side, but we think it's a little bit more, it's a little bit more multidimensional, and we think it's not just a typical demand gen fix. And so that's when I've been called in, and kind of crystallizing the experiences that I've had into what were kind of common denominators and common threads. And I just start to write that up and run it by friends. Say, hey, look, am I onto something here, or is this just not accurate? Is it not really data-based and or more systematic as an issue, the way that I've started to experience it? And it actually tends to come up quite a bit.
So it sounds like it started out with like some pattern recognition based on your experience being in organizations that were doing acquisitions, and then kind of evolved into a little bit more of a hands-on type of, hey, not only am I seeing this pattern, but like now I'm experiencing it and measuring it. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I've been in organizations that have done the acquiring and organizations that have been acquired. Yep. Now that you mention this, like, yeah, it makes sense. Like, that first year, everybody's fired up. Let's go. Let's cross-sell, let's expand, let's do all the things that are in the thesis of the acquisition. And then it just, that momentum starts to fade, and yeah, like it makes sense. So what are some of the things that, like, what are some of the metrics and measures that you've started using to see, okay, now that you've got friends bringing you in to kind of like evaluate this, and you're getting that hands-on, okay, yeah, this is a thing. What are some of those metrics and measures that you use to look for this, to see if this is happening?
Yeah. So, the typical things that I look for, are, first of all, is there a clear line of sight relative to data? Because, what tends to happen a lot with acquisitions, as you may have experienced as well, is that, we use very different decision gates. We have a different way of modeling our sales process and our handoffs with marketing. You had HubSpot, we have Salesforce, or vice versa, what have you. And in that set of data inconsistencies, a couple of things need to be fixed quickly, which is not bad, but the issue that I've seen a lot is that that's where it stays. Meaning, relative to sales, it's all about forecasting, good forecasting and sales reporting. And on the cost side, it's all about, like, hey, can we have a good handle on how we forecast expenses, and make sure that the EBITDA is not, compromised. And that, especially in the beginning, helps with that false positive in a way, because everything looks to be good. Our expenses are reasonable and revenues is good. EBITDA is there. So, life is good. However, what I found a lot is that the data soup, if you will, especially when it comes to the earlier piece of the funnel, that doesn't really get addressed systemically. And so in order to get a good handle on data, it's a challenge. The other thing that I found a lot is that, companies are, and this is a challenge for companies that I've been part of too, whether we were acquired or not, didn't matter. They're not as disciplined at looking critically at what go-to-market has served them to date versus the go-to-market paths that need to serve them in the future. And so 2 in particular stand out. Companies that have been very dependent on an inbound go-to-market path find it very challenging to get into really good sales-led and or ABM outbound strategies. The other one is, being too late with recognizing that you need a partner strategy, and not just partners for good coffee and stage presence, but truly partners that drive incremental revenue and help influence deals, positively. And so those are significant challenges. The other thing that I've seen as well, which is again very understandable, is that if you look at the standards, 95-5 and an 80-20 rule, meaning of 100 prospects, 95 will not be in market and 5 will be in active buying mode, and that 80-20, meaning the 80% of the buying journey that you can't see and the 20% that you can see. Well, the problem, first of all, is that because we want to be so efficient, well, let's go focus on near-term demand capture. All right. So that's a harvesting strategy, but you're not seeding, you're not cultivating new prospects. And then combined with that 80-20 rule, where probably in the past it was 50-50, right? It was a lot more evident when people were looking for solutions, when they were in buying mode and prospecting mode, what have you. And that's become a lot more difficult to discern. So by the time it really ends up as a discernible lead, if you will, then very often people already made that choice. And with the dark funnel getting darker, meaning more difficult to manage, it's not easy in a PE environment to justify that spend if the feeling is, well, the metrics around it are pretty elusive, and why don't we just focus on demand capture? Ultimately, you can definitely define it as a business case and make the numbers, but it's easy to get put into that's where you evolve into the situation of, hey, we've only been harvesting and we've not been consistent with building our brand and our category presence.
So, you said a ton there, and I want to kind of like address some of the stuff that you said there. It sounds to me like where the drift starts to happen is, we rely on that excitement and that momentum and that honeymoon phase. And we rely on it too much, and we think that the honeymoon phase is going to last forever. And what we don't do is we don't spend that time doing the things that we need to do to prepare us for when the honeymoon ends. Meaning, we aren't merging data silos. Company A and company B have their own data silos because obviously they're separate companies. Well, now suddenly there's an acquisition and they're the same company, and they don't fix the data silos. They keep them siloed and separate. They don't bother saying, okay, cool. Well, we know that company A's buying process or selling process is this, and company B's selling process is this. Let's find out what company AB's selling process should be, or go-to-market process should be, versus what happens a lot of times is we just say, well, company A bought company B, so it's all going to be under company A's go-to-market process now, instead of reevaluating to see if company AB should have some new pieces of go-to-market that aren't already currently there, or that would be a better fit for the new combined organization. Is that kind of what you're getting at here? Is that we either are late to address those things, or we don't address those things at all, and eventually they rear their ugly heads because we just relied on all that momentum of the honeymoon stage.
Yeah. And there's some other things too, right? So we hang on to the place that we were very comfortable with. We hang on to the go-to-market motions that we were comfortable with. Again, that notion of the founder, typically these are big personalities and they have a lot of sway in the industry. They have a lot of relationships. And based on the deal structure, they typically get an earn-out. And so in the beginning, they're very motivated, they're very keen. Then at some point, they start to hand over the reins, but to whom? And has there really been thought put into, okay, what was that founder really good at? And let's piece that up and let's see, well, how can we institutionalize that in a way or build it into the team so that if that person is no longer there, that we not only succeeded in replacing it, but also we've been able to scale it for further growth. Right. And so, and what I've seen too is that person sometimes can be very instrumental in closing large deals. Again, if we've been very dependent on inbound motion, well, then it becomes very challenging to replace that's the strength of that founder. And so it's a combination of brand underinvestment, sometimes budget compression, again, that tilt towards immediate demand capture, the founder transition, the go-to-market debt, and or the data debt. And then, go-to-market path stagnation is always a big one.
That's super interesting. Because now that I look back, I'm hearing you say this stuff, and I'm looking back, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Like I see this happening myself, so it makes a lot of sense. So if we were to take if you and I were to like sit down and go, okay, let's test this with an organization. What are some of the things that we would look for? Would we look for sluggish pipeline growth? Would we look for reduced win rates? Would we look at bad conversion rates through the funnel or massive leaks in the funnel? Like, what are some of the like really tactical things that somebody could look at and go, okay, I think we might be in this stall period?
Well, you bring up a good point, because there are symptoms to look for clearly. And also, this is hypothesis testing. So you want to be careful that you don't look for the right things in the wrong way. So what you mentioned, the symptoms typically that come up is, hey, our CAC is all of a sudden is growing. Our close rates are less consistent. Where our content's getting stale, our plays are getting stale, right? There's not that many references about us. We're missing the big prizes. We're kind of waning on the analyst coverage. It can be a variety of those things, but ultimately what it leads to is this realization, like, hey, we projected this and we're here and we don't seem to be in a position to, it's becoming a trend. So it's not just an event as in 1 or 2 quarters. No, it's becoming a trend. Is it a pipeline thing? Is it this or that thing? And so start with really good data. So you need to be able to normalize data. I like, the data concepts and the revenue architectural principles, because only that allows you to really normalize data to an extent that you can say, all right, so how good are we with, lead to opportunity to close? How are we good with, with our first year conversion rates, and what's our gross retention? What is our net retention, and so on and so forth. And then I've also had situations where I went down into a specific cohort analyses and start to look for, like, hey, where is it that we're starting to see, discrepancies? The other thing too that you need to look for very quickly early on, and I've learned that too, is just to ask the fundamental question: Are we experiencing lack of market trust, and or is it lack of product market fit? Again, it's not uncommon for technologies in particular that get acquired by a mothership, if you will. And so the product roadmap gets shifted to, well, we need to be able to meet the quality standards that the mothership has, and or we need to integrate with the core product, which means that we're not focusing as hard on building that next set of functionality sets that your competitors that are pure plays have been building. And so you may end up with some price competition. That's obviously the easier one to fix, but it can also be that you have sustained a lot of gaps in functionality sets. So that's not something that, an investment in brand or what have you can go fix. So the model then also should dictate, like, okay, so we're going to diagnose it. We're going to look for a bunch of things. Again, don't forget the go-to-market path as well. Right? What's our win-loss analyses? What are our offer economics, and so on and so forth. But that in sum total should dictate how are we now going to allocate our most critical resources, i.e. capital, and people, to make sure that we can get this to a better place.
Ooh, you hit one that really resonates, is the investment in development shifting from innovation to integration with the mothership's platform, or the main product that this is going to be now a part of. I mean, we've seen that in marketing ops and rev ops with, just look at Pardot, and when Salesforce bought Pardot, like, yeah, what innovation has Pardot done in the time that since Salesforce purchased them?
Yes. Yeah.
right?
And at the end of the day, it's part of the investment thesis, right? Well, we can only afford so much as a percentage of 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 um of the cost to and the revenues that we have in the margin structure to invest in any type of development. And so if your customers are expecting like, well, but I need to be, so I can control that now through your single pane of glass that you have, or your dashboard, or whatever integration levels you had. Well, that's an expense, and that's a set of efforts. And so you can't cover everything, which is not to say that you shouldn't do that, but you need to be clear about what the effects are of those choices.
The other thing that you said that I really want to just focus in on is you mentioned that this is the diagnosis of this is looking for symptoms and it's hypothesis testing.
Yes.
And I think that's a really important concept when we talk about, because this is Attribution Nation podcast, we talk about marketing measurement and how critical hypothesis testing is to marketing measurement. So for our listeners, if you are creating reports and you aren't using your reports to either A, answer questions, or B, answer hypotheses, what you're doing is you're looking for a needle in a haystack, because you're building a report and hoping that something's going to jump off the screen at you that tells you, hey, based on this report, I need to go do this. That's the wrong way to approach it. You have to start with either a question that's like, hey, help me understand how XYZ is working or is not working, or a hypothesis that states, hey, I think our lagging sales are because of X, Y, and Z. Let me go test that hypothesis by recreating a bunch of reports to answer those questions.
Yep. Yeah. And, attribution is a nice one there to kind of double click on for a second. I had it with one portfolio company where this is enterprise sales, and we start to look at attribution information. Well, a lot of these customers come in, or a lot of these prospects come in through forums. I said, well, that's good and bad, right? Well, I said, well, I understand the good, but what's the bad? I said, well, if you had no clue why they're coming to you, how would you say that you already have validated, or what are you building in to make sure that you're not going to waste your time with somebody who's just going to use you to squeeze a better price out of the vendor that they already selected? And again, this was a company that had underinvested in the dark funnel, was not really tracking anything that spoke to like, okay, well, is there any self-attribution? Are we doing anything that helps us understand what share of voice we're creating, what share of search we're creating, and any other dimensions that are critical to their business and their category? And was just waiting for stuff to show up, and then they would move forward. And so this is where attribution, I think, can be very helpful to better understand, okay, what's the cluster of activities that if you would model it out all the way, not model out, but if you analyze it all the way through, that gets us to a repeatable result.
Yeah, I think one of the things that again, just another thing to call out here that you mentioned is the why people are coming to us, right? And attribution does a really good job of telling us how they got to us and what they interacted with. But it doesn't get up here and get into the why. Why did somebody search this term that got them to our website? And then not only that, but why did they decide from there to fill out the demo request form, right?
Exactly.
That why is hugely missing in marketing measurement today. And
yeah. And it's hard. And I don't know about you, but I started in my career in sales because I wanted to be in B2B marketing. And one of the things that I learned during my solution selling class was, hey, these are the questions to ask to make sure that you're not spinning your wheels and you're column fodder. And that stuck with me. And so to your point around attribution, it's the how is typically where our attribution technologies come in. The why, that's a harder one to discern.
Well, the only way to get it is to ask your buyer, right? Because like,
Obviously.
and the example I use all the time, because my business attribute is launching this service where we're going to help understand the why. But the thing that I always come back to is like, so if you look at attribution or incrementality testing or media mix modeling, any one of those three measurement methodologies, they're all great. They all do different things slightly differently. They're all fantastic. We recommend all three. But the challenge is none of them would catch the fact that the reason I'm buying from you is because my brother is your VP of sales. Right? All three of them are going to say, well, you were targeted with marketing. You saw our brand on LinkedIn. We served all these ads to you. You even clicked on one of them and came to the website to read some stuff. But all of them are going to miss the fact that why you're really buying is because your brother's the VP of sales. So of course you're going to buy from your brother versus, your competitors that aren't your brother. So that's one of the things I think is just missing is that why.
No, I agree.
Yeah. So we took a little detour there. Back to the stall. So when somebody identifies that this stall has happened, how do they get out of this stall? I mean, I'm sure you've got some steps to take that say, okay, well, we've identified you're in the stall. Now let's work to get out of this. What are some of those steps? And you don't have to give away your secrets here. Obviously, we want people to work with you and not give away everything here. But what are some of the things that people can do?
Well, I would say in general, it's very multi-dimensional based on the type of business you have, where exactly your challenges were. But, lay out a path that invariably does something like, okay, so obviously you want to diagnose and stop the bleeding, contain it. Then you want to start to rebuild a foundation, and then you want to set yourself up for scale. So depending on where it hurts, I would say, again, always start with the data. Because if you can't have data, tells a story. And if you don't have that discipline, and again, this can be this is not atypical from even very large companies, that the data is directional at best, or it's just missing because guess what? We never needed it, and we had much bigger fish to fry. Well, whatever you're going to go, you're going to need to have a good normalized data set. So you need to have solid CRM stage mappings, and you need to have good handles on performance data. So the way to tackle any corrective plan is it starts with data. And I would say, the three broad steps obviously is you want to diagnose it first, and contain the bleed. Then you want to rebuild your foundation, and then you compound and scale. So if you double click on that, again, it starts with the data, and you want to make sure that you start to cut, first of all, obviously, and it sounds perhaps like a redundant statement, but you want to make sure you cut any spends that are no longer effective. And so based on the diagnostic that we ran through earlier, where does it hurt the most, and what can we fix within what time frame? So are those data gaps? Is that a go-to-market path realignment? The trust piece, if that's the issue, that's the piece that you can dig into very quickly. Everybody records calls these days. It's not too hard if you have a loyal customer base to kind of revamp and rethink how you do references and how you get the small bits out there, how you do creative things with video. How can you leverage your existing customers, especially in mid-market, and I would say especially enterprise, to help you with some of the selling, and involve them in more intimate events or webinars, what have you, and demos. So the proof manufacturer is really key. And then you start to orchestrate your go-to-market paths. Again, hopefully by then you've built you're retooled in such a way that your SDRs can be much more effective with outbound data and personalization strategies, that your sales team has at least a good foundation of ABM The other thing too that I've seen a lot, and it's surprising, companies tend to spend a lot on events, and they treat them as such. Meaning they treat them as events and they don't treat them as programs. So they don't have very clear, definable tactics and goals that programmatically build up. Like, here's what we're going to do at this particular event. Here's how we want to convert the prospects into an early stage. This is what we want to do with prospects that are further along, but they're in the middle of sales cycle. And this is what we want to do with closing. And if you can build a business case around that, and I've been with a company where we got beat by a much smaller competitor who did that effectively. You can actually build a business case around a much more significant investment around that particular program tactic and be much more effective. So those are things that you can do relatively short term.
As a former event manager of 7 years, I have to 100% agree with you on how most organizations treat events. It is what happens the day of the event, and everything else is an afterthought. The single largest piece that organizations miss related to events is what happens after the event. How do we stay engaged with these folks and further them down the buying cycle after the event? Most organizations, the event is the end of the event is the end of the engagement. Whereas it really should be the beginning of the engagement, not the end.
Yeah.
Huge miss.
Yeah, but I would say up front as well, like, how do you plan to an event? Are you just going to have a booth? Or let's say, we're going to have an analyst breakfast or something where we can convert the unfaithful or the people that just don't know us that well yet.
Well, you know what we're going to do, EJ? We're going to do the exact same thing we did last year. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Whatever that was, we're just going to do the same thing we did last year.
Yeah, but I've had it too in a. I'm going to date myself here, but there was a VMworld where we plowed, I don't know, $200,000-$300,000, and we had so many booth scans, and our booth, our double decker booth, was written up and whatnot. Half year later, not much that impacted the pipeline. Fast forward to the year after, where we made it a contest between reps. We made very specific programmatic investments to make sure that we got on the right panels, that we got, again, the right events lined up, either for prospects, for people that were mid-stage, people that were end of stage, and we made it a competition. And we made the same investment, but we got 3x the outcome versus the year prior.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I can tell you about conferences, if you're relying on booth scans, what you're going to get is mostly just the trick-or-treaters that are out there. They hold out their bag. Scan my badge so I can have your piece of candy or your stuffed animal or whatever, your pen or whatever you're giving away. Just scan my badge, put the thing in my bag, and I'm on my way.
Yeah. So the other thing too, when I start to look at this 24 to 36 months stall, was like, hey, is this happening a lot? And yeah, like I mentioned, it's happened enough to think through that piece. We haven't even touched on elements like, hey, what's the legacy team? Are they still stuck in the past, or are they just need more clarity? They need better data. They need more enablements, and they can be an absolute force multiplier for the future. But the other piece is, so if you just take a step back, you look at things like, well, there's a diagnostic, if you will, and then how do you treat it? It's also, how can you solve it? And so the likelihood that this is going to happen is significant enough that you really want to treat it as an explicit and almost like a priced risk. So can you quantify things like founder dependency? Again, was this a technical talking head and influenced all the standards and so on? Okay, well, we need to have a strategy for that. Was this a person who was really instrumental in closing large deals? Well, let's look at our go-to-market paths as well and see what it is that we need to invest to build off, to lower that dependency if that when that person leaves. Again, the data quality beyond just expense reporting and EBITDA, and forecasting and revenue attainment. Really look at that full funnel. I'm still surprised at large companies how few of them have found ways to communicate to the entire workforce. Well, this is how things, here are how our levers have worked over the last quarter, of last year, in terms of lead to opportunity to close, our expansion, what worked, and where we're gonna want to trend up, and where we're gonna make very particular bets. Yeah, data quality, I mentioned that, and last but not least, category position. The fact that we are now the leader in a particular segment, and that what pushed us on the market or got us a very attractive, sale price. Well, how are we going to scale that out in the future as these categories change? And have we, again, priced that in and built that into the operating plan, and align investments accordingly? Or are we just going to take the old backs like, wow, we're only going to flag it as risk, but we still want our EBITDA and we still want our growth? Well, if you go with the latter scenario, and I'm not saying that everybody works that way, you can, the probability that you're going to run into the 24, 36 month stall is much larger.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to circle back to that you mentioned earlier, is you mentioned that in order to diagnose this and see this, to solve it, that it starts with the data. What are some of the most common data challenges that you see that organizations have that would prevent them from being able to really either prevent this stall or properly solve the stall?
I would say anything that has to do with, actually say it's a combination of two things. The data itself, everything that maps to the front end, the left side of the bow tie, if you will. So top of funnel to where it's more sales owned, and so on and so forth, and the conversions in between. So having a consistent data set relative to that, very clear handoff points and so on, and that being reviewed by the go-to-market teams in conjunction. That's key. The other thing too is and I love what one of your prior guests said, like, hey, it's not about reporting, it's about the news. Okay, so how does this impact the sustainability of those efforts? Meaning, how much of it converts not only to pipeline and into revenue, but what continues to keep it as loyal customers, and not only that, provides avenues to expansion. Invariably, what I've heard is like, well, we only know this part of the equation. All right, but wouldn't you be interested in the rest? Oh yeah, I would, but that's not how we've set up reporting. That's not how the go-to-market leaders report and or communicate. So I can only see it from my environment. And so as soon as you started with having a consistent approach to how you should communicate your go-to-market performance, and then two, mapping the data sets accordingly and making that available to everybody in a way that's not only just pure data, but also the explanation of it. Like, hey, this is what this means. And now it helps us to better qualify the investments that we're going to make.
So just to shine a light on two really important concepts from what you just talked about there is regarding data. Number one is consistency. I don't care if you're consistently not doing the exact right thing, the exact right way every time. Mm-hmm. I care that you're doing the same thing consistently. Even if it's not perfect, just be consistent, because consistent imperfection is better than inconsistent perfection. Because data that is stable, that is telling the same story, is way better than, well, sometimes we have great data, but sometimes the data is down here and it's not very good at all. So consistency is one of the most important things you can do with data, is be consistent in how you are creating and collecting and curating that data. And then number two, the second piece of that is the piece you talked about with regards to the intentional design of the data. you are not going to accidentally fall into good data. It doesn't happen. It absolutely doesn't happen. There's this old analogy. It's called knot theory. Knot theory is, remember when we used to carry a bunch of cords and cables in our backpacks everywhere we used to go, all of our earbuds with the cords and everything. And what did they always do? They always got tangled. Why did they get tangled? Because inevitably, unless you proactively wrap them in a certain way or tie them in a certain way or store them in a certain way, inevitably they're going to get tangled. It's just how the laws of nature works. And data works the same way. If you don't intentionally design your data capture, creation, and curation, you will not accidentally fall into good data. You have to intentionally design those systems and those processes and those data points. Otherwise, you're going to get a mess. You're going to get a tangled knot, similar to, I mean, we're recording this in December, so similar to the big Christmas light knot that Clark Griswold hands to Rusty in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. That's going to be your data if you don't intentionally design it.
Yes. Yeah. I can empathize with the analogy. I didn't grow up in this country, so I don't know it, but I can see what you say. Absolutely. You have to be very intentional with the quality of your data, and you have to be very intentional with how it relates to how we all perceive and understand the buyer's journey and the mapping to the sales journey. And if there's inconsistency there, or especially like, well, no, this, again, you've lived this journey. No, this is what we mean with that phase. Okay. Well, how are we then going to reinterpret, if you will, our legacy data? That needs to be documented. That needs to be thought through.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be surprised with companies that have just been very successful and have grown to $100 million, where that's, in hindsight, we could have been better there. Again, these are all very real things, as in, well, we've all been part of that, guilty of it, what have you. But what I was trying to do here is just say, okay, well, how can we make this, absent of just a set of risk factors, just more of a managed risk, so that it's embedded into how we look at companies in the M&A phase, how we do the operational plan, and that we allocate resources around it and set expectations accordingly, so that we don't have these tripwires that lead to surprises.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, just for anybody that's listening that might be in an M&A phase right now, pay attention to this stuff, because you can proactively prevent the stall from happening. Number one. Number two, go hire EJ and he'll make sure that you don't have this stall at all. We always like to take the last few minutes here to just talk about some key takeaways and some of the most important things that I heard, that in case our listeners want to skip to the end and hear the most important stuff. These are the most important things that I heard as part of this conversation. So, number one is there's a few things that continue to recur during a stall, which is that there's not always clear access to data. There's data silos. There may not even be a data plan at all, or the plan is messy. Is there a solid agreement on the go-to-market path? Should we be using ABM? Should we just continue with what we've been doing in the past? Probably not. Do we need a partner strategy? Probably we do. Usually that's missing. Some of the big red flags to look for to see if you might be on your way to a stall or in a stall would be things like growing CAC. In case our listeners aren't familiar with CAC, cost to acquire a customer. So if if it costs you more every single time you acquire a new customer, that could be an indicator that you're going into this stall. Close rates are inconsistent, and they're kind of moving all around and probably getting worse. Our content is becoming stale because it's no longer relevant after the acquisition. And then, ultimately, if our projections and forecasting are almost always wrong, then you might be getting into a stall here, or might be in a stall because you're unable to forecast at this point. Another thing that we took away from here is that, attribution can be helpful because it helps us identify the cluster of activities that gets us to a repeatable result. However, it's never going to tell us the psychological why behind why somebody bought. There's always that uncoverable thing there that attribution doesn't get. Now, if you find yourself in a stall, a few tips to get out of the stall. 1, talk to EJ, go hire him. Number 2 is start by trying to see if you can look into the data to diagnose what might be causing the stall, rebound, and then compound, and then scale. It's kind of like the steps there. And then I love that you said, particularly as it related to identifying like wasted spend and where you're, just wasting dollars and capital. You said, where does it hurt the most and what will it take it to fix? I love that because I always love starting with the biggest source of pain or the largest source of pain and solving that. Because if you can solve the biggest or largest source of pain, you're making an impact.
Yeah, if I may add one thing to it, when you find yourself in stall-like symptoms, make sure you really critically test yourself with your stakeholders. Is this a product market fit problem? And or is it a market trust problem? Market trust problems can be fixed with go-to-market marketing. Product market fit issues have other drivers and impacts to go address before you can fix the go-to-market piece.
No, that's a great call out. Thank you for adding that in there. So those are the big takeaways from today's episode. So EJ, thank you so much for joining. It was a pleasure having you. I certainly learned some things here today about M&A and what may happen as part of an M&A process. It's funny because again, I've been through these, and you mentioned.
Yeah, I was going to say that's when you think about it, we've all been there.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Like, I've experienced this, but I've never thought about it in these terms, and seen it put to paper like this in such an easily understandable way. So certainly appreciate that you've taken the time to do that. And again, thank you so much for joining. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Drew. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You as well.